This morning, back to the book of Isaiah. Book of Isaiah this morning in chapter 9. I'm going to have you look at a couple of other passages of Scripture as well today. So be ready to turn to a couple of other places as well, but we begin in Isaiah 9. There is a lot here. And we will get the most out of this passage if we understand the history and the background of the historical setting where Isaiah is writing. And I want to deal with that. We've dealt with that in different times, different settings, as we looked at Isaiah 7 in particular. But what I'd like to do is move to a particular place in this chapter and really deal with a lot of the history, bring more of that historical background out to us kind of as we wrap up our series that we'll be considering together over this month. We've titled our series for this season, Above Every Name. It was common in the ancient Near East for kings to take what's referred to as a kingly or a regnal name. They would take a name for himself. He'd take a name for himself that was supposed to describe his character or his aim or his goal or who he was to be revered as the king, and these names would have particular meaning. We also understand that in the Hebrew culture as well, names were significant. They didn't just name him Fred just because somebody was named Fred. There was a meaning. There was an intention behind that name. In fact, Isaiah, in these first couple of chapters, has already talked about a couple of sons of his own. And he's given them a couple of names. So if you're looking for names or know somebody's looking for a couple of good boy names, you could choose from Meir Shalel Hashbaz or Shir Jashub. Okay? But each of these names had prophetic meaning. And these boys were named something in particular to match the message that Isaiah was proclaiming to the people of the nation of Judah at this time. Well, remember at the time that Isaiah is writing, this is a dark time in history. And it's a dark time for the people of God. The nation has been divided for generations, and there's been constant warfare between the northern kingdom of Israel, or Samaria, and the southern kingdom of Judah, where the city of Jerusalem rests. But in addition to the internal war and strife on a global scale, things are now frightening, terrifying. There's a brutal, vicious superpower that has risen and begun to conquer that area of the world known as Assyria. And they're a brutal people. And there's fear among those that live in Jerusalem that perhaps Assyria will come over and dominate the northern kingdom and then come and take us. And so there were some who said, well, what we need to do is we need to make an alliance with another strong power. So let's go down to Egypt and partner with Egypt, and Egypt will help us stand against the onslaught of Assyria. But God warned the people through Isaiah, no, don't do that. You need to trust me, not Egypt. But then there were those in the northern kingdom that felt Assyria bearing down upon them. And so the northern kingdom of Samaria got together with a neighboring nation and said, let's tell you what, let's do. Let's put our armies together, and then we'll get the kingdom of the south, Judah, to put their army with us, and we'll all stand against Assyria together. But Judah didn't want to partner with the northern kingdom, so the northern kingdom said, well, all right, well, we'll just fight you and dominate you and force you to. And so there's war going on with them. And in the meantime, in Jerusalem, in the southern kingdom, they're ruled by Ahaz, who has rejected the authority of God himself. This is Ahaz the king, who back a couple chapters earlier when Isaiah approached him and said, ask for a sign from God. God has sent me to tell you, ask him for a sign. that he will keep his word and keep his promise and protect you. Ask him for a sign. Anything you want, there's no limit. Ask him whatever you want. In the sky above, earth beneath, God will demonstrate and prove to you. What an offer. Imagine a prophet of God coming to you and saying, okay, you need assurance from God. God has sent me to tell you, you can ask him to do whatever you want him to do to prove his faithfulness to you. There's no limit. Ask him whatever. And Ahaz straightens himself and says, I won't ask. I'm not going to tempt God. He's quoting from or referencing Deuteronomy, the command not to put God to the test. Well, it's okay to put God to the test when God comes and says, put me to the test. But Ahaz didn't want to put God to the test because Ahaz didn't want to trust God. Ahaz had his own plan. And Isaiah talks about that. We'll spend some more time there later on. So even at home, Isaiah starts out in the first part of this book talking about how the people are continuing their religious practices, but their heart is far from God. There's no reality to what they're doing, and they've mixed God's worship in with everybody else and what everybody else is doing, and all kinds of idolatry. And the priests of the people are not devoted to God, and the leadership of the people is not devoted to God. Civil war and unrest, the danger of being overtaken by a foreign superpower, corrupt politicians, moral collapse. Yeah, it's a shame the Bible isn't more relevant to our life, isn't it? But that is the world and the setting in which Isaiah is speaking. The end of chapter 8 and verse 22 says, they shall look unto the earth and behold trouble and darkness, dimness of anguish. They shall be driven to darkness. It's a good description of the world of Isaiah's day. And as is the case in our world today, some parts have it worse than other parts. Things were bad in Judah and Jerusalem, but things were far worse to the north. And so in chapter 9 and verse 1, we see a promise. Nevertheless, the dimness, remember what we just read? They'll look to the earth, behold trouble and darkness, dimness of anguish. They shall be driven to darkness. Nevertheless, the dimness will not be such as was in her vexation. When God at the first lightly afflicted the land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali, that's to the extreme northern part of the northern kingdom of Israel. And afterward did more grievously afflict her by the way of the sea beyond Jordan in Galilee of the nations. They've already experienced the horrors of a war-torn life. They've already been under the pressure of deportation from Assyria. They've already experienced the darkness that this world can bring when we reject the rulership of God. But as one writer tells us here in this verse, surprisingly, begins to predict that the least likely area of Israel, the far northern section that was the most militarily oppressed and the most influenced by pagans. He calls it Galilee of the nations, of the Gentiles. These weren't all just Jews. They'd been mixed and deported and had pagans come in, and the worship was messed up and the theology was messed up and the ethnicities were messed up. But in this area, the most militarily oppressed, the most influenced by pagans will in some way be honored by God when he sends a new light to be coming in the future. Isaiah says God's going to do something. He's going to begin to bring a change. He's going to accomplish what may seem impossible. It's been pointed out that if you read these verses, you'll see kind of a pattern here of what the Lord does. He's going to establish a new situation by his own act. The one that he has humbled already, that he's brought difficulty to, he's going to honor them. You're going to see what the Lord's people enjoy. Darkness will become light. And then what follows after that, the Lord is going to increase the joy, and his people will rejoice before him. And then Isaiah circles back around and begins to broaden that out a little bit more. What is the Lord going to do? We see, let's read these verses together. The people that walked in darkness have seen a great light, verse 2. They that dwell in the land of the shadow of death, upon them has the light shined. You have multiplied the nation and increased their joy. They joy before you according to, like the joy in harvest. When farmers bring in that bumper crop and there's joy. They're going to rejoice the way men rejoice when they divide the spoil. That when you see those military oppressors have been turned on their heels and run away, and you're taking all their stuff and rejoicing in victory over them. That's the kind of joy God says is coming. Because, verse 4, you have broken the yoke of his burden. You've broken the staff of his shoulder, the rod of his oppressor. Like in the day of Midian, he's sending their minds back to when Gideon was used by God to deliver them miraculously from a far superior force. Verse 5, every battle of the warrior is with confused noise. Garments rolled in blood shall be with burning and fuel of fire. He's picturing the turning of the military tide, that even their military oppressors will be brought down, and their uniforms themselves will be burned up and used as fuel for the fire. And how is he going to do this? 4, verse 6, because unto us a child is born. Unto us a son is given. We'll spend more time unpacking all of these verses later on. But I want you to notice as you read through here, we see the people that walked in darkness have seen a great light. They will see this. They that dwell in the land of the shadow of death, on them the light has shined. You have multiplied the nation. You have increased the joy. He's talking about this as if it's happening right now. It hasn't happened yet. But that's how certain these words of promise are. He's able to speak of them as if they've already happened, because God is going to bring this about. To us a child is born, to us a son is given, and the government shall be upon his shoulder. His name will be called Wonderful Counselor, the Mighty God, the Everlasting Father, the Prince of Peace. Of the increase of his government and peace there shall be no end upon the throne of David and upon his kingdom, to order it and to establish it with judgment and with justice from henceforth even forever. The zeal of the Lord of hosts will perform this. How do you know it's going to happen? Because God said it's going to. And his zeal is going to bring it about. This is his plan and his desire, and it's going to happen. This is quite a promise. And it expands a little bit on the promise that he's already made in Isaiah chapter 7 about a virgin conceiving and bringing forth a son. He's going to round it out nicely in chapter 11 with the promise of that root coming up out of Jesse's line. And are reminded of for us today. Again, we'll spend more time on that context later. But I hope we've already begun to see and make some connections that the world in which Isaiah lived was not dissimilar from ours in many ways. And especially as we see the advent of artificial intelligence, the increase of various kinds of electronic currencies, the confluence, it seems, of world leaders that are trying to find a way to just get everybody to operate under the same standard in the same way. The turmoil that's going on right now in the Middle East, many of us are looking at these situations and saying, my goodness, the things that have been prophesied must be close. I don't disagree. But what I'm touched with and reminded of as well is, as we look at our society as a whole, doesn't it just seem like the world is completely upside down? Like more and more what used to be called common sense is less and less common. But not just that. Actual reality is being brought into question and even denied. I look at our world and I'm convinced that we need something desperately in this world. We need a wonderful counselor. We need a wonderful counselor. And when we think of that word counselor, I think in our setting, as one said, one of the most popular words of the hour across the Western world is the term counselor or counseling. Because the development of the science of psychology, together with the pressures and problems of our modern age, we're becoming people who cannot live without counselors or counseling. I've seen commercials on TV now. Big stars are promoting things that you can go online and get regular therapy online. I see the commercials now. You can go online and have doctors prescribe for you various kinds of medications to deal with symptoms of depression or things like that. And we're looking for those that can come alongside. And when we think of a counselor in our age, we're thinking of somebody who will sit down with us in a room and calmly look to us and say, so how does that make you feel? So go on. Let's talk about your child. Let's talk about these things. That's not a bad thing in itself. But when we think of a counselor, that's what we think of. Somebody to help me get to the root of who I am and help me to figure out my best way forward and make me feel a little better and just be able to talk through my problems. And that's kind of the idea. There's a slightly different understanding of counselor here. There is the sense of a counselor in a legal sense. We think of a lawyer, an advocate, an attorney. One who is there in a legal sense to stand by and give guidance and direction in the face of impending judgment, but also one who is able to bring that prosecuting power to work when necessary. But we also think of one who is able to advise, to give direction and counsel. The kings would surround themselves with counselors, with wise men who could see what was going on around them and look at situations and make wise decisions to provide wisdom in the midst of difficult and seemingly intractable situations. And I look at our world today and I see the need for that. We need a counselor, but a good one. We need one who is in fact wonderful. And the word here, wonderful, it's about the closest that the Hebrews had to the word supernatural. It is full of wonder. One who is able to do exceeding abundantly above what you would expect would normally be available or possible. This is, as one said, a wonder of a counselor. That's what's been promised. And that's what we need. Would you look at a couple of other passages with me quickly this morning? Keep your spot there in Isaiah. We'll be back to the Old Testament in a minute. But jump forward to James chapter 3. James chapter 3. We need a wonderful counselor. We need to realize that there are truly only two sources of wisdom. We need to realize there are truly only two sources of wisdom. And that sounds crazy when you look at our world because everybody's got something to say. But we as believers need to understand there are really only two sources of wisdom. In James chapter 3, we read in verse 13, "Who is a wise man and endued with knowledge among you?" And before everybody raises their hand and says, "Oh me, I'm wise." James says, "Let him demonstrate this out of a good lifestyle, a good conversation, his works with meekness of wisdom. But if you have bitter envying and strife in your hearts, Glory not. Don't boast. Don't lie against the truth. This wisdom, which wisdom? The wisdom that results in bitter envying and strife in your hearts, that wisdom does not descend from above. It is earthly. It is sensual. It is devilish, demonic. For where envying and strife is, there is confusion and every evil work. If that doesn't describe the wisdom offered by our world today, I'm not sure what does. Envy and strife. How are we told to respond to this world? There are people who will tell you that every situation, every relationship you're supposed to look at today is supposed to be viewed as through the lens of an oppressor and the oppressed. You're supposed to identify yourself based on your ethnicity or based on your so-called sexual orientation or based on something that sets you apart from everybody else, and that's going to cause you to be at enmity with those around you. And there are those who are believers in Jesus Christ or profess to be believers in Jesus Christ who are starting to preach those things from pulpits. But James says this wisdom doesn't come from above. It's demonic. But the wisdom that is from above is first pure and peaceable and gentle and easy to be entreated, is full of mercy and good fruits, without partiality, without hypocrisy, and the fruit of righteousness is sown in peace by them who make peace. We've spent a lot of time unpacking that chapter in the past. We don't have time this morning. But we need to remember that ultimately there are only two sources of wisdom in this world. There's wisdom that's from above, from God Himself, and wisdom that isn't. And that's really it. We need to realize there are truly only two sources of wisdom, and we need to examine the wisdom that guides our lives. Again, another familiar passage back to the Old Testament here in Psalm 1. Psalm 1. You're familiar with these verses. Blessed is the man that walks not in the counsel of the ungodly, nor stands in the way of sinners, nor sits in the seat of the scornful, but his delight is in the law of the Lord. In His law doth he meditate day and night. He will be like a tree planted by the rivers of water that brings forth his fruit in his season. His leaf also will not wither. Whatever he does will prosper. The ungodly are not so. And I love the way the Hebrew is there. Not so the ungodly. But they're like the chaff that the wind drives away. When you thresh wheat, the usable part of the wheat is inside that little shell that's on that stalk. And when that wheat is winnowed, it's beaten and then would be beaten and then tossed up into the air, and the wind would carry away the lighter shells and husks and stalks and all that, and so that those would be just carried off and carried away, so that the good usable seed could fall back into that sheet or whatever their tarp or whatever they're using for that old ancient winnowing process. And God says here that the one who is ungodly, the one who is not following after the wisdom of the Lord, is like the chaff that the wind drives away. There's nothing of substance and nothing of use. The ungodly are not so, but are like the chaff that the wind drives away. Therefore, the ungodly shall not stand in the judgment. And again, in our English ears, wait a minute, the ungodly won't face judgment? No, that's not what that means. They will face judgment and will not remain standing. They will be found guilty. In ancient times, if you're brought before the judge and convicted and found guilty, you don't stand there. They cart you off for execution of sentence. The ungodly will not stand in the judgment. Sinners will not stand in the congregation of the righteous. For the Lord knows the way of the righteous, but the way of the ungodly shall perish. Psalm 1 tells us again, there's only two ways here. It's the way of God or the way against God, and there's a path that leads. And the one who is in the most enviable condition is the one who delights in the law of the Lord. We need to realize there are truly only two sources of wisdom, and we need to examine the wisdom that is guiding our lives. And we need to acknowledge that we cannot guide ourselves. Proverbs chapter 3, verse 5 and 6, you're familiar with that verse, is lean not on your own understanding. It says, trust in the Lord with all your heart. Lean not to your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge Him, and He will direct your paths. Don't lean on your own understanding. Jump back once again to Romans chapter 1. Romans chapter 1. The wrath of God, verse 18, is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who suppress the truth in unrighteousness, because that which may be known of God is manifest in them. God has shown it to them. The invisible things of Him from the creation of the world are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even His eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse. Because when they knew God, they glorified Him not as God, neither were thankful, but became vain in their imaginations, and their foolish heart was darkened. Professing themselves to be wise, they became fools, and exchanged the glory of the incorruptible God to an image made like to corruptible man, and birds, and beasts, and four-footed beasts, creeping things. So God gave them up to uncleanness. Verse 25, they exchanged the truth of God for a lie. They worshiped and served the creature more than the Creator. Verse 26, God gave them up to vile affections. Verse 28, because they didn't like to retain God in their knowledge, He gave them over to a reprobate mind, to do those things which are not fitting, being filled with all unrighteousness, fornication, wickedness, covetousness, maliciousness, full of envy, murder, debate, deceit, malignity, whisperers, backbiters, haters of God, despiteful, proud, boasters, inventors of evil things, disobedient to parents, without understanding, covenant breakers, without natural affection, implacable, unmerciful, who, knowing the judgment of God, that they which commit such things are worthy of death, not only do the same, but have pleasure in them that do them. We could go on, but the concept here, the idea that we're seeing here, is that we as human beings know what we need to know. It's not a lack of information that's the problem. But even knowing what is true and knowing what is right, we choose what is wrong. We can't guide ourselves. But we as humanity have this primal drive in our heart that says, I'm going to seek to make my life work myself, apart from God. We need a counselor. We need a wonderful counselor. We need somebody who can counsel us better than we can counsel ourselves. I'm just noticing. Something weird happened here. I don't know. So Isaiah says here, in Isaiah 9, that this promise of what God is going to do, this light from darkness, this hope from hopelessness, is going to come about because a child will be born. And a son will be given. And again, we'll spend more time there, but a child is born. That's a human thing. But a son is going to be given. That's a divine thing. And this son that is given will be called the Wonderful Counselor. And I know some of our English translations have a comma between wonderful and counselor. And I know Handel in his Messiah did a beautiful job putting a nice pause, lovely pause between wonderful and counselor. But we see these descriptors in these names: Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. He is, as we said, a wonder of a counselor. Jesus, we need a wonderful counselor, and Jesus is our wonderful counselor. As one said, wonderful counselor here combines the idea of doing something wonderful, extraordinary, miraculous, with the skill of giving wise advice, making plans, and counsel. This suggests that this son's life is going to exhibit miraculous acts of God, employed in the sphere of wise planning or decision-making. Since God is the source of all miraculous events, and his plans are the wisest counsel to follow, God is going to work in and through this son to demonstrate his extraordinary wisdom, to plan wonderful and miraculous things. Jesus is the wonderful counselor. He is our wonderful counselor. He's the one that we need because he knows this world. He knows this world. He knows its foundation and its fall. We read from John 1, in the beginning was the Word. He's echoing the words of Genesis. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Jesus knows all about that. Because what did we read? That without him was not anything made that was made. The Word made all things. We can read at the end of Colossians and see that Jesus is the one who is involved in all of creation. And all of creation is will ultimately be brought under his authority. But he knows this world. He knows its foundation. He was there when it was made. He was the Word speaking this world into existence. And he knows the fall of this world. He knows what happened. He knows the rebellion that has set us against our Creator from the very beginning. He knows that drive in our heart that says, I will make my life work myself apart from God. He knows that. And it's that heart that he came to do something about. He knows this world. He knows its foundation. He knows its fall. He knows this world's futility. He knows what it's like to live in this world. It was Jesus who cried out, "Come to me, all you who labor and are heavy laden, and I'll give you rest." He knows that's what this world does. Isaiah promised it's the ones that are sitting in darkness that will see this great light. Those that sit in the valley of the shadow of death, it's on them that the light has shined. These are the ones who need it, and Jesus knows that. He knows its futility. He knows the future. We could take time and pull out the statements that Jesus makes about what's going to happen. You read in the Gospels where the disciples ask him, tell us about the kingdom and when it's coming, and Jesus lays out the whole thing. And we're looking forward to a day when Jesus is not going to be a victim, some victim of history. He is the one guiding and conducting history. He is the wonderful counselor because he knows this world that we live in. He knows its foundation. He knows its fall. He knows its futility. He knows the future. He knows how this world works. You ever try to get advice from somebody on something something they've never experienced or never dealt with? You know, he's usually good about that. Some of the best parenting advice you'll ever get are from people who haven't had any kids. My wife and I used to be perfect parents. And then we had kids. That's how that works. Well, Jesus is not just some abstract thinker up there just saying, well, hey, try this. Well, hey, try. No, he knows where we are. He knows what this life is. He knows how this world works. He knows what the problems are. In fact, he's diagnosed it for us there. Paul tells us in Romans chapter 1, this is what the problem is. Our world doesn't want God in charge. So even the truth that God presents, they suppress. And they've exchanged what God wants for that which is what they want. He knows this world. You know, if you're going to fix this world, you got to know what the problem is, and Jesus does. He knows this world inside and out because he made it. He made this world. He sees it, he knows it, but he's not part of it. He's not bound by it, but he knows this world and he knows you. He knows your thoughts and your motives. We're told by the writer of Hebrews that this word is living and active. It's powerful. It's sharper than any two-edged sword. It's able to divide asunder between the joints and the marrow, the soul and the spirit. It's a discerner of the thoughts and intentions of the heart. We were talking Wednesday night back in John chapter 2, at the end of John chapter 2, where there were many that said they believed Jesus, but Jesus didn't entrust himself to them because John said he knew what he didn't need anybody to tell him what was in man because he himself knows what is in man. The number of times that Jesus is conducting his earthly ministry, and I think about the times that he looks around on those that are opposing him and he says, why are you thinking these thoughts in your hearts? When he's looking at that man with the withered hand on the Sabbath, and they're all looking around going, is he going to heal him on the Sabbath? And Jesus is looking around on, why are you thinking what you're thinking? He knows our thoughts. He knows the reality of our hearts. He knows what motivates us. He knows what's truly driving us. I love his encounter with that rich young man that came to him and said, what do I need to do to inherit eternal life? And Jesus answers him on the surface to start with, well, hey, keep the commandments. That's what God says. Keep the commandments. Well, which ones? Well, how about these? Oh, I've done that. Okay, good. You just lack one thing. Go sell everything you have and give it to the poor, and you'll have treasure in heaven, and come and follow me. And the man went away sorrowful because he had great possessions. How did Jesus know? He put his finger right on where the issue was for that young man. It wasn't the problem with riches. The money he had was from God. It could have been used for God's work. There were many wealthy people who supported Jesus in his earthly ministry. Having money was not the problem, but he'd rather have the money than Jesus. That was the problem. And Jesus was able to put his heart right on that situation. You know, for you and for me, Jesus knows not just what you do, but he knows why you do it. You know, one of the things that frustrates me, I think as much as anything, is to be accused of something, to be accused of doing something for a reason that wasn't my reason. That's not a very eloquent way to say that. But you've had that, you know, well, you just did that because, well, actually, that's not why I did that. I hate that. Don't you hate it when people misinterpret your motives? Jesus knows your motives better than you do. Jesus is able to zero in on what's really driving you and what you're really about. He sees it and he knows it. You're not hiding anything from him. See, we need a wonderful counselor, and Jesus is this counselor. See, this is one of the things that makes Jesus such a wonderful counselor. He knows this world inside and out better than we do, better than we possibly can. He knows every permutation of this world, but he also knows you to the nth degree. You know, one of the difficulties I have in offering counsel, and that you have offering counsel, is there's just a lot we don't know. And many times, some of the key information that I would need to give you wise counsel in this or that area of your life is a key piece of information that you've decided just not to tell me. For whatever reason. Maybe it's embarrassing, or maybe you don't like it, or maybe you're not even aware of it yourself. But Jesus knows. There's nothing hidden. So the writer to the Hebrews tells us all things are naked and open before the eyes of him with whom we have to do. That's part of what makes him such a wonderful counselor, is there's nothing hidden. He sees it. He knows our thoughts and motivations. He knows your frame and your foe. I love that statement in the Psalms. He knows our frame. He remembers we are dust. He knows accurately what he can expect from us. And he still enters in anyway. He also knows the foe that we face. Remember that conversation he had with Peter. Peter, Satan has desired to have you that he might sift you like wheat. We battle this world. We battle the flesh. We battle the devil. And Jesus knows all of those foes intimately. He's able to give us guidance. He's able to walk us through. He's able to be the wonderful counselor. Because He knows you, your thoughts, your motives, your frame, your foe. He knows your need. What is it that I need? I love the little post that I've seen from time to time. It says, sometimes all you really need is somebody to come up to you and say, I know life's tough. Here's a hug and a coffee and $10 million. It's all you need. Sometimes I think that's all I need. But behind that desire, at least for me, maybe you're probably holier than me, but the desire, at least for me, is if I had that $10 million, well, then what? Well, then I'd be able to handle things, right? God, don't make me trust you with this. Just give me the means to handle things myself, and I'll be okay. Did I say that out loud? I never say that out loud. I don't need to, because He knows that's my heart. Maybe that's yours too a little bit. Maybe it's not the $10 million. Maybe it's just, if I could just get these people around me to do what they need to do, if I could just get this situation lined out, if I could just get that person to do this, or if I could just get this situation to fix here, then I'd be able to, I could take it from there. No, you can't. The biggest need that you and I have is to acknowledge our need. I love that hymn that we sing. Let not conscience make you linger, nor of fitness fondly dream. One of these days I'll be fit enough to go to God and do what He wants. No, you won't. The only fitness He requires is to feel your need of Him. I mentioned the prodigal son last week in that speech. I've sinned against heaven and in your sight. I'm no more worthy to be called your son. Make me as one of your hired servants. And the only part of that speech he was able to get out was, I've sinned against heaven and in your sight. I'm no more worthy to be called your son. Yep. Bring the calf. Bring the robe. Bring the shoes. Bring the ring. My son's back. What is it that we need? We need to acknowledge that Jesus Himself is all we need. He knows your need. It is not for more information, although that's good, and sometimes we need to know some things to make wise decisions, and He can help us with that. But your biggest need is not more information. Your biggest need is not more money. Your biggest need is not more time. Your biggest need is not more skill. Your biggest need is greater dependence on Him that results in greater obedience to Him, greater trust in Him. I need more of Him, in control of more of me. That's what I need, and He knows that. So when you seek counsel from Jesus, here's just to give you a heads up. When we seek counsel from Jesus, that's always the direction the counsel's going to go. Just so you know. Jesus is never going to counsel you to pursue more of yourself for yourself. He's always going to counsel you to pursue more of Him for Him and for others. Did I just blow up the world's whole counseling paradigm right there? Maybe, I don't know. But He knows our need. That's why He's a wonderful counselor. He knows this world. He knows you. And here's the biggest thing. He knows God because He is God. See, your greatest need is to be reunited with your Creator. And Jesus happens to know how to make that happen. What did we just spend time reading in John 14? You believe in God, believe in me. Philip says, Lord, show us the Father, and that'll be enough. Philip, have I been so long with you and you've not known me, Philip? If you've seen me, you've seen the Father. Sinful creatures cannot look on the glory, on the unmitigated, pure glory of God and His holiness. We can't. So the invisible God made himself known. The Word became flesh and dwelt among us, tabernacled, tented among us, and we beheld his glory. The glory as of the only begotten of the Father, full of grace and truth. God said, you can't look on me, so I will come to you in a way that you can see me. I will reveal myself to you. You can't get to me, but I can reach to you. And that's why Jesus was able to say, when he was questioned, Lord, where are you going? We don't know where you're going. We don't know the way. Yet, yes, you do. I am the way, the truth, the life. No one comes to the Father except by me. One of the things that I'm saddened by, disappointed about, is when we look at a room like this morning, and as far as I know, we don't have any lost people here. And that's, in one sense, that's okay, because if you're lost, you can't really worship. You're separated from God by your sin. But you're invited to come and see and come and hear. And it would be wonderful to be able to communicate the gospel directly to people here in the room who don't know Jesus. That would be great. And by his grace, we'll be able to do that over these next few weeks. But this is the message that God has given to us. So we desire, we'll take opportunity over this Christmas season to do things to get our friends and neighbors to come to the church, to hear someone speak this truth and this good message. And that's a good thing. But understand that when God revealed himself to those shepherds, they went to see, and then from there they went and told. You know somebody who needs a wonderful counselor. And it would be great if they were sitting in front of me today and I could say, hey, it's Jesus. But God's plan for you is to be the one to tell them, hey, it's Jesus. One pastor said this: therefore, let us bow down and worship Jesus Christ. Even if we are impressed with the scholarship of man and the achievements of scientific knowledge, let us not play the fool by trumpeting the wonder of these tiny chirps while ignoring the thunderclap of Christ's omniscience. Jesus alone is worthy of our highest admiration. Jesus alone is worthy of our trust. He can show us the Father. He can give us irresistible wisdom. He can see how to make all things work together for our good. Not one of his judgments about anything is ever mistaken. He teaches the way of God with infallible truthfulness. Trust him, admire him, follow him. For in him are hidden all the treasures of wisdom and knowledge. You need a wonderful counselor. And we have one. It's Jesus. Let's go to him.